good to start. To reintroduce myself, my name is Erin. I am the Senate Democratic Caucus Director. Thank you everyone so much for joining. We're really pleased that you all joined us again for the second town hall of the legislative session for the Washington District Senators. A few logistical notes before we get started. We ask that all participants ask their questions for the senators via the chat function. And if you have a question about the process of the forum, please also ask that via the chat. If we don't get to your question this evening, there will be a chance to revisit. I will send out my email at the end of the town hall for folks to follow up. We will likely plan to do another town hall in a month or so, and we'll plan to wrap up around 6:45. So with that, we'll begin. I'll turn the mic over to Senators Andrew Perchlik and Ann Watson. Senator Ann Cummings will be joining us in a few minutes, but Senator Perchlik and Watson, if you want to give us a committee update about what's new and relevant, that would be great before we transition to questions.
Good. Well, I'll go first. Usually we let Senator Cummings go first as the senior senator of the delegation from Washington District, but she was probably like me, just rushing here from committee meeting. We're wrapping up the budget, so definitely at the forefront of my mind these days, although I think most Vermonters are interested in what's happening with the education bill and with property taxes. I've been focused on the budget, which definitely affects the folks' financial well-being, but it's, on the grand level, it's a $9 billion budget, still has over a third of that in federal funds.
Where is mine?
The big discussion on the budget has been what to do if there are drastic cuts from the federal government. We rely on billions of dollars of federal government money to run our transportation system, to run our healthcare system. So if there were drastic cuts, as kind of the congressional Republicans are talking about, we would be in a world of hurt. So we're trying to decide how to prepare for that. We're trying to move our budget to be leaner. We're working with the governor's folks to avoid a budget veto that we think would be just problematic on several fronts. But we are also making investments in healthcare. And we're saving some money for the education transformation, the additional money that the Agency of Education is going to need because they're kind of under-resourced as it is, let alone to do a big project. Investing in all kind of sectors of the economy, a lot of money for housing. The House and the Senate and the governor all agree that we're in a housing crisis. And from my position, a lot of other problems that we're having kind of come out of the housing crisis. So we're putting a lot of money throughout the whole different parts of housing, from missing middle to apartments to the VHIP program that renovates vacant properties, to BHCB that would renovate large affordable housing, old historic buildings downtown. So we're putting money all throughout different types of housing. We're doing manufactured home, mobile home projects. And so it's a lot of work, and we're getting close, and it's encouraging that it seems like the House and the Senate and the governor, although I obviously can't speak for the governor, but that we're getting, I think, to a position that we can all be supportive of this budget. So I'll pass it on to Senator Watson, unless Senator Cummings is here.
I am here. Can you hear me? I can't it says my video is on, but I'm not getting any camera. So I might have to go out and play with my camera.
Or could be, do you have a?
No, I've tried sliding. Wait, there it goes. Okay, I got it. All right. So I'd missed the question, so.
Yeah, I can regroup. Thank you for joining us, Senator Cummings. We are doing
committee.
What's that?
I said I just got out of committee.
I know, I heard. We are just doing really brief overviews of what's the latest in your committee. I think folks would probably be most interested to hear an education bill update from the perspective of Senate Finance. We're keeping it a few minutes to each senator to give an overview if you want to go next.
Okay. We have the education bill. We got it yesterday. We've been through a side by side of the House version and the Senate version. Uh, Today we started delving into the different proposals for base and weights and funding. And then we had the chair of Senate Education, Senator Bongartz, in to talk to us about what their thinking was, why they made some of the changes they made. It was a robust discussion. And when I left, they were all still there. So um, we are going to have, we've been asked to get it out by a week from tomorrow. So we will be doing some pretty intense work. This will probably be the earliest we get out.
Do you want to briefly explain what pupil weights are for maybe folks who don't know that
Yeah.
already?
Uh, Pupil weights, we presently do them, I think most places do. They're based on the concept that some students take a little more effort than others. um, 3 years ago, four maybe, we redid the weights for the first time since maybe the 1970s, and no one could find any logical reason for why we had the weights. And what they do is they say you get a base amount of funding per student, and then they add um, additional funds. Traditionally, we've added taxing capacity. The newer weights are some of them are adding actual dollars to a cost base. We redid the weights based on taxing capacity. Under this new structure, it needs to be done because it won't be local taxes. It needs to be done as an additional payment in some form. So English as a second language is one of the big ones. Poverty, children from economically deprived is the second big one. Um, High schools, additional weights have been on and off. We have several consultants who have different approaches that we're working with. And but that is your base funding. It's the base plus the weights is how much each school will be getting per student. And these are going from 1,300 to a base to I think 15 plus the weights.
Thank you. Let's transition to Senator Watson.
Hello. Just want to thank everybody for being here. I'm Ann Watson. I'm the chair of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee, and I also serve on the Appropriations Committee with Senator Perchlik. We're glad that he went first and talked about the budget. But in terms of natural resources, I want to tell you a little bit about some of the stuff that we've been working on in committee. Uh, One of the themes for the session seems to be stormwater runoff, particularly. So we had three bills that were relevant to stormwater. So one being looking at uh, potentially creating a program for private salt applicators that would be voluntary for them to participate in, and would explain best management practices about how to apply salt to surfaces. I mean, we're just coming out of that season where it's just, crunching all the time on in parking lots and sidewalks as we try not to slip and fall going into buildings and whatnot. But there is pressure to oversalt in areas for the sake of safety. And we're seeing that across the state there is increased salt levels, which is actually putting a lot of pressure on our aquatic biota and those ecosystems that are already not doing very well. And so the salt is making it even harder for them. So there, to the point where there are some places in Colchester and South Burlington that have been identified as salt impaired. Anyway, all that is to say, looking at a program that would be voluntary for salt applicators there, if they go through this program, they would get some level of protection from slip and fall liabilities if they're following the best management practices for salt. So that's one thing. Another issue that has been a long-standing issue is how phosphorus, how stormwater runoff is regulated from farms. We got a letter from the EPA saying that we had to transition the jurisdiction from the Agency of Ag to the Agency of Natural Resources as to enforcement for that. So we have a bill responding to the EPA's requests there. So moving forward with that, and we hope that ultimately results in some better management of stormwater runoff from farms, which we know is a significant contributor to phosphorus in Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog. And so hopefully, we can start to see some of those levels coming down. And the third one related to that is something called the 3-acre rule. Some folks here may be familiar with that. There's a lot of details I could go into here, but just as a simple overview, and if folks are interested, I'm happy to go into more detail. But in that theme of we're trying to reduce the phosphorus levels going into Lake Champlain because it creates toxic algae, it creates fish kills, dead zones. It's not good. One of the sectors that's responsible is developed lands. And so if you have 3 acres of impervious surface, roofs, pavement, asphalt, sidewalks, that kind of thing, cumulatively, if there's 3 acres or more of impervious surface, then you have to treat that stormwater runoff to mitigate the phosphorus runoff. And so there have been a lot of issues with that rule, particularly being very expensive, and it's not always clear who the responsible party is. Anyway, all that is to say that we have a bill that delays the deadline on that to give people a little bit more time to get into compliance. It increases the amount of money available for that program because it is very expensive, and it incentivizes municipalities to take on some of the responsibility for these permits. So there's money for that. And the third thing is it looks at the potential for just a different mechanism called a stormwater utility, or potentially a regionalized stormwater utility that may be helpful in alleviating some of the pressure from specific homeowners to be responsible for these projects. So those are 3 bills that we worked on related to stormwater. I think it is also worth mentioning that we have had a number of floor amendments that came to bills that were on the floor. The budget being one of them. I have bills on my wall to repeal a lot of our climate-related work. And I think this is absolutely not the time for us to be going backwards on our meaningful climate legislation. And so, thankfully, these floor amendments to repeal the private right of action in the Global Warming Solutions Act, to repeal the Clean Heat Standard, and to I've seen both a repeal and a delay of the Clean Cars and Trucks rule. Thankfully, none of those made it through. So, we heard from a lot of folks asking us to not walk back any of our climate commitments, and I'm so grateful for folks using their voice and being heard about that. So that is sort of the highlights, I suppose. I'm happy to talk about any of those things in more detail, or any of the other bills that we are potentially working on. One thing I did not mention was housing. Happy to talk more about what we're doing in terms of housing, but we'll see what folks are interested in.
To an income-based tax to fund education. But what we keep finding when we look at these things is that it's complicated. It took 60 graphs to get through it. But basically, and we're finding it now when we're playing with homestead exemptions and how do you equalize that? Who gets hurt? When we hit the top, we also end up charging the bottom more, and it's counterintuitive. But after that summer study committee, what we did is we said, well, if you want to go to an income base, this is how you do it. But nobody on that committee put that bill in. It was despite everybody really wanting to do it. The other thing is that the income tax is the major source or one of the major sources for the general fund. If we take the taxing capacity out of there, then we don't have it to fill in with all the issues that Senator Perchlik has to deal with. And I'm going to let him talk about those.
Well, the question about the religious schools, I know that's
Religious
been
schools.
something that there's and there's religious schools and then there's independent schools. When I was on education, the Macon decision had just come out from the state of Maine, which has a similar kind of system of school choice for those towns that don't have schools. And they were sued in the Supreme Court, agreed with the plaintiff that the state of Maine had to provide kind of equal access. If you were going to give parents choice, you had to, like, you couldn't say you couldn't go to the religious school because of the freedom of religion clause of the U.S. Constitution. So we were dealing with it. I thought we had found a way through our state law, as I think the question mentioned, the state constitution, that we could we could require the school to be clear that they were following Vermont discrimination laws. And some schools are not taking religious schools are not taking public money because they've refused to agree to the anti-discrimination laws. But I know it's choppy waters because of the U.S. Supreme Court. But I think we've so far been successful of preventing the public dollars from going to the religious schools that refuse to follow Vermont anti-discrimination laws. But maybe there's been an update since then, and I would hope that would continue in the education
I believe
transformation.
there was a second part to that question. The bill, as it's come over from the House and as it's come out of the Senate, they have different numbers. But the state of Vermont has a long history of tuitioning students, and we had a presentation on our different governmental structures, and Crazy Quilt would be more difficult to put together. Many of our districts do not operate. Some of them do K-4, some of them do K-6, some school districts don't have any schools, and they tuition out to independent schools in their area, and some designate schools that they will tuition to. Others just give parents free rein to go wherever. It's all over the board. Both bills limit and I'm more familiar with the Senate. Right now, it's supposed to be your the amount you spend on a student, the average statewide that goes with the kid. But towns can vote to pay more, like the tuition rate of a private school. That's going to be gone. In schools that do not operate A grades, whatever, because right now we don't necessarily have a viable alternative. There is no public high school within a reasonable distance. They will still be able to tuition, but only to schools. They will only pay the amount of money, the base, the foundation, plus the weights that go with each individual pupil. So there will be no above that amount. They will get the same amount as a public school. The school they go to has to be an integral part of the education system in the area, meaning if that school didn't take those students, there wouldn't be a really viable alternative for them. And there's been different percentages. The Senate bill has 25%. The House, I think, had 50 or 51. The argument is what is a viable, how do you designate you're an integral part of the system? This is all still up there, but there will be a large number of smaller independent schools, which can include religious schools that will, and it also will not include independent schools within a district that has a fully operational structure. So you can't tuition out to an independent high school if your district operates a high school, and it has to be within your district, I believe. So the redistricting will put limitations, and I know that's a concern about public money going to private schools. This will greatly limit that. We also have 4 academies, private academies, that have been functioning as public schools. St. Johnsbury probably being the one most people are familiar with. St. Johnsbury Academy is the public high school in St. Johnsbury, and I believe Linden is in Lindenville. And they will be getting the base rate. I don't know if that's above or below. So this redistricting, and both plans will be limiting public payment to independent schools. We can't limit it. The federal Supreme Court outweighs us and our Constitution. So we can't discriminate, but it will eliminate tuitioning to a fair number of private schools.
I would just add, because you all have said all that I really wanted to say, but I would add one other thing, which is that I had heard that there were some cases where public tuition dollars were following kids to private schools that were out of the country, even overseas, and so that as envisioned by this bill would no longer be allowed or be the case, which I am very grateful for.
I think it's within 25 miles of the border. And it's an equal number of kids that come in that go out. But no, we won't be sending anyone to Europe for a while.
Right. And the Senate passed the bill to prevent that before, and I was surprised that it didn't make it through the House that we kept it to within certain miles of the border because there's some towns that the school in Massachusetts or New York is a lot closer. They don't really have a school near them. and they have these cross-border school districts. But just at the beginning of the question too, I didn't get to, is that I do support the moving to a income-based education, but I was on that same working committee with Senator Cummings, and we did run into problems of what we do with renters and some other things. So I like some of the suggestions that the public assets has suggested on how to slowly move there. And we had a amendment today on the floor from Senator Bohosky that would basically do that, but she wanted to take the 77 million to kind of help those lower income folks on their property tax. But in a way, I saw it as a way of addressing this income issue. It didn't pass because it was just kind of dropped on the floor. But I hopefully the Cummings committee, if they ever get a break from all the work they're doing now, so maybe in the future we can address some of the issues through the other methods.
We're going to.
Yeah, I guess I would add on to that too. Yeah, I'm continue to be very interested in moving to an income-based proper funding for education. Though I hear all the difficulties and concerns, I would hope that someday maybe we can work through those things, but it doesn't seem likely in the short term.
Okay. Thank you all. Let's transition to live questions. I see that Dave Bellini has raised his hand. Dave, if you want to unmute yourself, or I can ask you to unmute as well. Can you hear me, Dave?
Oh yeah, I'm trying to unmute and put my picture.
Oh, great. We can hear
Hey,
you.
well, thank you. I agree, income-based. I wish it would just happen. Somebody would be bold enough to do it. Income tax, much better way to fund education. Low-hanging fruit, I think, is combining Montpelier High School with Union 32. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to actually remember when we were all in one school. Over 1,100 kids at Montpelier High School. And we cried, and there was heartbreak when they separated. That was the student reaction way back then, 50-something years ago. So it seems like both schools have really shrunk in size, and we got less and less students. And Montpelier flooded, so it might make sense. There's a lot of this cliquishness, or amongst the schools, it seems like. I don't know why they wouldn't want to merge. I don't think education would suffer, but I'm not an education expert. So I don't know why it couldn't happen. You might save money and you might get a better education. Well, just something to think about. It seems obvious. It seems like it'd be obvious. So I'd like to know what you guys think about it. By the way, you're doing a great job. All three of you.
Thanks, Dave.
I can do that.
Sure. So I guess I would chime in to say that my understanding is that the Montpelier Roxbury district, as well as U32, they are actually, I believe, actively looking at this right now. There's a group that I think is working on that. And it's interesting, just to zoom out for a second, as we have been having this conversation at the legislature about districts and what the right size is for a school, and are there logical marriages that could happen? It sounds to me like there have been a number of examples of places that are of their own volition starting to have those conversations about merging. So I think that's encouraging, and I don't think that's necessarily that merging is necessarily right for all districts, but if there are some logical pairings that can happen and happen organically, I think that's the best. Though I think there are likely some cases in which there may be some mergers that probably should happen where the left to themselves they may not. So, but I think you raise a good point about Montpelier and U32, and I happen to work for the Montpelier school district, so I'm going to not say too much more about it, but I'm very interested in the work of that group.
Yeah, and I've heard from parents that think it would be good that have kids in both schools, and I think as we saw with some other schools, sometimes the parents are the ones that want to do the merging or close the school because they see it's best for their kids. I mean, sometimes some very small schools will fight really hard to keep a very small school open, and I think that's something that I'm trying to maintain. At least people, if the parents and the people really want to keep a small school open and can figure out how to pay for it, I want to keep that local control. But I think more and more folks are realizing the benefit of some larger schools, especially if you're your child or you're looking out for people that are a little bit different. I talked to a parent of where their daughter is the only girl in like a 6-person class, and they're just not having the same kind of experience as others, and so they would really like to merge so that their child can have more of better experience. So I think more and more we're seeing the parents and the people in the town moving to close the school. What they don't want is being forced to close the school by state bureaucrats or some mega board from 6 towns away.
Nothing in the bill right now mandates school closures. I think that will ride for a while. We know that in really small schools, you just can't afford to give every child the educational experience that they deserve in the way, you might give them reading, writing, and arithmetic, but some schools do not give advanced math. Some don't have much in the way of a fine arts curriculum or a science curriculum, and the things that you need to be successful today. So the goal is to give every child that access. I think what everyone's thinking is when you get your payment for child that and you can't go out and you may be able, that's still up for debate in the bills, can you raise anything over that foundation amount? And if you can, then it's going to have to be balanced to comply with Brigham. Otherwise, we'll go back to where the towns with a great deal of property wealth can raise a lot of money for very little tax burden, and their kids will have a much better education than the kids in poor towns that have very limited tax base. So I think it is going to be more limited and to how much you can raise. I think I'm going to have a proposal coming to the committee, not from me, but from another senator, limiting what that additional dollars can be spent on. But at this point, no one has dared step on that rail and say, you need to make these closures. We knew 10 years ago when we did Act 46 that many, if not most, of our schools are not financially viable. We have lost 40,000 students. So you're right, Dave, when there were 11,000, I think Montpelier has about the same number of kids that they had when my kids went there. In this high school, but that's with Roxbury added. That and we're one of the more populous areas. That overall we have our student population has been declining for 20 years, and so and our parent base is aging and aging out of the wage earning, and so it's coming out of your retirement savings, and it's become very stressful. I think everybody wants to fund their education, but every time, people go to the grocery store, they get really nervous. And now I think people are even more nervous. I've never seen so many people just so stressed as they are right now about all the financial unknowns that are out there. Um, this could be the best it is for some time. And, we're all testing our ability to deal um, with the unknown.
Thank you. I would encourage Joanna to ask her question next. She has a question about rural school closures as well. So I will call on Joanna to
Can you
ask.
hear can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. I have so many things I want to say. I'm trying to organize them so that I ask the right question. I I live in Cabot. I have two children in the school system. My husband was on the board and the chair of the school board for quite some time. We went through the Act 46 mess. I guess I'm saying this just to speak from another voice. I'm not in Montpelier. I'm not in Burlington. I'm in a rural area that continues over and over to have our school threatened to disappear. It's confusing when Act 46 definitely didn't work the way that I believe the legislator had hoped that it would. It didn't show that it was going to save any money. One of the questions I have is, why are we having such a focus on changing the governance structure of these schools and going to these bigger districts when there's no evidence or proof that there is even going to save any money? And second to that, what I'm hearing since I came up with this question initially is, I haven't heard any of you guys mention that the whole purpose that this was pushed forward was to save money for people, which was really similar to what Anne was just mentioning, that people are feeling the purse really, really tight right now. But it's leaning more and more and more on, oh, well, this person's not getting an equal education to the town next to them. And I don't see how those relate. The reason I'm saying that is I live in a town where if you're not happy with the way your student is being educated, there is a local governance control over going to your school and fighting with your fellow taxpayers to vote to maybe close the school or to change things. And that disappears. And what we worry about is that if our school goes away, our town will die and our kids will be bused very far, because out in the rural parts of Vermont, kids are already on the bus for an hour and we're all with 20 miles from the school. Whereas if we have to get bused to neighboring towns or Lord knows where, these kids are going to be on the bus for a really long time, especially in the winter. And I worry that nobody's going to want to live in Vermont if these small quintessential towns are not available for people to live in. You're only going to have like old people living on retirement, I guess, instead of having families moving in to towns where they can put their kids in schools. I mean, my children walk to my school. That's the luck that I have in this beautiful community here. And we've now had a threat 4 times in 10 years of our school being closed down. And it's incredibly disruptive. We finally have some stability. We have people tuitioning in from all kinds of choice schools now. Everybody's very happy. Education is moving upward. And now we're looking at yet another threat. So my question is, why are we here? And how is this going to make things better for people that don't live in high population centers? How is it going to make it better for us? Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. I think that's what we're still struggling with. We are struggling with one of the other statistics that's out there is that we have one of the highest high school graduation rates in the country, and we have one of the lowest continuation rates. Told that 50% of our students do not go on to anything post high school. That's HVAC training, LPN training, any kind of advanced training that is necessary to sustain any kind of a job in our culture. And so, from a state, we have to say, why is that? What are we missing? Why can't some of our kids that qualify for green and gold scholarships to UVM be able to accept them without having to take online courses outside of their school to get the number of math and science credits that are required to get into college? And so we're trying to do that. This system the governor has talked about with no details calls for small elementary schools, larger middle schools, and then more regional high schools. Again, there's no maps. There's no, there's no names named. All of this is to be out there. I think if your school can afford to run and has enough students to be able to run on the Foundation Plus, then no one is going to close you. High schools, there'll probably be more pressure on because that's where the diversity of if your high school does, if you're the one kid that could be the concert pianist, but your high school doesn't have a band because they can't afford it or they're too small to staff it, or a football team, or you name it, that kid's losing out. So how do we structure that? And we know this year we're looking at the basics. We're trying to develop a roadmap as to where we think we're going. Over the summer, there will be some form of summer working groups or group. And then next year, all those, we will start coloring in the blanks. So right now, I don't think anyone is going to make you close your school. And we know that the schools are very important to their communities. We know we're going to have to put some kind of money into expanding or at least fixing the leaky roofs on the high schools we have. We know we have a long way to go and we may need to raise more money, but it's a dual goal. And the first goal I've heard from everybody from the administration, the Department of Education, is to provide every child with an excellent education. And right now, we know we're not succeeding at that. There'll also be an increase in accountability, I think, and the ability and requirement that public school standards are enforced, that we are paying more attention to what we're doing. But I think everyone also recognizes that there is value in a small school. The definition of small may be debatable, but there is value in a small school. I walked to first grade on a main route in Massachusetts for over a mile to first grade. No one would allow that now. I'm quite sure whoever lives in the house I lived in is bused to first grade. Actually, they tore the school down. So maybe they don't get bused. But those kinds of standards have changed as to how far we feel safe having our children move away from us. Um, and, we're dealing with that.
So I would just say, thanks for the question, John. We're here because of, I'd say mainly because of the election, the high property taxes that we had across the state, and the governor's position on this. And we need to work with the governor, given the numbers of supporters the governor has in the legislature, the Republicans I'm talking about. So we're forced to work on things with him. And they even though there was a lot about property taxes, they really are a center company that's talking about this as education equity and education excellence, and they're equating education excellence with more options, kind of that Senator Cummings was talking about. I don't know if that's always the case. I agree that sometimes a small school is better. It's not always better, but I think that is the choice I'd like to see the locals make. And I think something that could be better for small schools like Cabot is the rural weights for those students, other support that you'd be getting as a small by necessity school, so that there wouldn't be this, ever having to bus your students, 2 towns over to find a school. And I think that's like that we had in whatever the waiting bill was, Act 127, trying to start realizing that the rural schools need support. There's some of them probably do need to close because they are so small. But like I said, I'd like that to be a decision by the town. And Cabot has a lot of spirit and support for their school, and I think that's great. So they want to keep it open, should be allowed to keep it open, and find a way to make it work together with the surrounding towns. But there are some others that don't have that same kind of support, and I question whether they should stay open. But as I said before, I don't want the state forcing them to close.
Yeah, and I would add that so I did get to go to that forum in Cabot. Was it last week or so? And that was a great event about particularly about the Cabot school, and very interesting. And one of the things that I felt like I really heard there was that small schools can provide a really excellent educational environment for their students, and so for that reason, I was really grateful that the Senate's version doesn't have any class size minimums or school size minimums. So I think that is a step towards helping keep the Cabot School open. But I also I'm also glad that Senator Perchlik raised the issue about the governor, because that's what I was thinking as well. In part, there there is a lot of pressure to get something done about education funding this session, and particularly because we don't have votes to override a veto. We're forced to have at least take his plan as a starting point. And I think there's a lot of conversation to be had about what parts you want to leave behind or think have merit. But my hope in all of that is to at least in the short term, like, do no harm, so that if we can see that we're going down a path and maybe we need to switch directions at some point, that there's time to do that. And so and that's also one of this question about, like, why why are we here? And this is one of the reasons why I am more interested in the funding side of things. How we raise those taxes and making sure that we're setting ourselves up to be more progressive about how those taxes are collected, and ensuring that that those folks who are not feeling as much pain now end up paying a little bit more because they can. So that's some of my thoughts on that question.
Thank you. If anyone has one more question for the senators, we were planning to wrap up in a little under 10 minutes. But if we want to take one final question. I'll give us another 15, 20 seconds.
I can't believe that Steve Finner doesn't have a question.
I was going to say, I thought I heard Steve's voice.
Steve, are you there? You're on the call, so
Maybe he stepped away.
okay.
Or Renee for that matter. I see Renee's on there. She usually is not afraid to ask a question.
I believe Renee had a few questions already in the yes, she had a few questions. She actually, she had one question we didn't get to. I'll pose this one. Considering risks of loss of federal money, has there been any discussion about a new state bank that allows Vermont money to recycle back towards Vermont programs? And she said this is a ND model. I'm assuming that means North Dakota, but
Dakota.
If they do, they're the only state that has a state bank. And when I first entered the Senate, there was more talk about a state bank. Beth Pierce at the time didn't support it, but I don't think it's come up to where I've heard whether Treasurer Pichek supports it or not. And I like the idea. One time, Anthony Polina had an idea for a Vermont credit card that people could have that would keep that money circling in the state instead of supporting large out-of-state banks. But no, the answer to the question is no, it hasn't really come up this year or the last couple of years, but I think maybe it's time to at least discuss it again. I know it ran into all sorts of problems and difficulties that I'm sure Senator Cummings will tell us about. But
yeah, we did we looked at it fairly extensively. North Dakota, a century ago, its citizens did not have access to major national banks. They were out there in the frontier. There was no banking. So they set up a bank and they capitalized it with their mineral extraction. They were getting a lot of state money in. Vermont, given that they aren't building granite buildings anymore, we haven't found anything anyone really wants to extract. I know Senator Polina worked extensively with Treasurer Pierce. Vermont's version is VITA, the Vermont Economic Development Authority. They work with the regular banking system, but they provide access to capital. Sometimes they're the underwriter that allows larger banks to help smaller businesses, but they are a kind of commercial loan bank. Out of that study came the 10% for Vermont of the state revenues. We had the Deputy Commissioner for Banking from the Department of Financial Regulation in and asked him what were the requirements, the financial requirements to set up a bank. And it was several years ago, and I don't remember them, but it was a lot of money. And when he finished, nobody on the committee brought the topic up again. It takes to meet our regulations for a bank, takes a lot of money, and Vermont has tax revenues, but they come in and they go out. They don't just sit there in the bank to deposit. So what we don't have is a bank. We have credit unions, which you can get a local credit union. It keeps your money local. But we don't have a state bank in which you can open a checking account, mostly because we haven't found that there's any need for one. And given the number of banks that are been bought up, bought out, there's a huge consolidation in that area. If we could get one up and sustain it is highly unlikely. But we have looked.
I don't know if people can hear me. This is Renee.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you, Erin, for getting back to this question. Because I have a lot of questions about if what seems to be a near future reality that we're going to start losing federal funds in big programs like Medicaid and Social Security and other health and human service programs, then I think Vermont legislators and our governor, or we might need a new governor, but whatever we need, we'll have to rethink what the conversation was in the past and figure out how Vermonters pay our money. And not only that, but I mean, I had this conversation with Beth Pierce, and I loved it that she came up with the program that Ann was just talking about. And Vita does a lot of important things. And I am no banking expert, but the conversation I had with Ann Pierce always got to the point where she was agreeing with what I was saying, which i.e., right now, Vermont, and you could ask her, she could give you the numbers, from when she was the treasurer. Vermont had X amount of millions of dollars cycling through a commercial bank. And so that commercial bank had access to Vermont funds to invest wherever it wanted. And I venture to say that, and your historic reflection on North Dakota's founding of their state bank is probably accurate, but those millions or billions, whatever Andy knows is the budget and is in reserve, if it was established in a state bank, then Vermont could be making the choices about where to reinvest that money as it's cycling through. And without knowing all of the details, every time I had this conversation with Beth Pierce, she'd nod her head and say, yes, yes, but I just don't support a state bank. And so if we are going to be losing all of these millions of dollars of federal revenues, it seems like we have a model that's been working for many decades in North Dakota, that it would serve ourselves to emulate that. And I mean, I hesitate to talk about the banking lobby, and when you bring commercial bankers in to advise you is maybe not the smartest move. I mean, bring people in from North Dakota and consult with people who've been doing it for decades. That's just one idea. I'm sure there are other ideas out there, but the last thing I want to say is I'm really upset that the legislature is going to pinch out homeless people. I noticed in the last report I read yesterday, or maybe it was this morning, that our countable numbers of homeless are suddenly up to 5,000. And it is unconscionable. And I know that our legislature is up against a very stubborn GOP governor, but it's absolutely unconscionable that we would say we cannot raise the money to make sure that everybody has secure shelter. Just no excuses. So whether it means putting extra taxes on the wealthy and having governor veto it, do it, because people don't understand and won't understand unless you see what the governor is vetoing. And when Democrats stand up and go along with the governor just to negotiate, you're giving away your power. And so then you have to take responsibility for seeing people who are dying on the streets. I mean, literally. So that's my rant. I was trying to be polite and put things in the chat, but since Andy mentioned my name, I thought I'd let you know how strong my feelings are. And people on the ground like me have feelings just as strong. And this is one of the reasons why Democrats are losing in elections, because you're not really standing up for what our Vermont Democratic establishment has always said were Vermont values. So thanks for hearing me out, and thanks for organizing this event.
Thanks, Renee. It wouldn't be a time without a rant from Renee. So we're glad to hear it. And I agree with you, but part of the problem is just our ability to get the message out equal to what the governor can do as far as messaging when he has the whole government in the eyes of the media and press more than we do as a citizen legislature. We did send him 2 bills that included expansion of the motel program so that we could house more people, and he did veto it twice. And we didn't have a budget adjustment act because we were saying we weren't going to do it until we could expand the program. We cut out everything else that he was objected and only put in the expansion of the hotel program. He still vetoed it. And we have a responsibility to just like get the budget done and get everything work done and get out of there. Every week we're there, it's $300,000 taxpayer dollars. So it's aggravating that it's not supportive of finding a way to house those people, but that's just the situation we're in. And we can't just send him bill after bill that he vetoes when he has the support of the Republican caucus where they won't go along with us. Definitely not on that issue. We didn't get really any support. On some issues, there are Republicans that will go along with us, counter to the governor. We're seeing that on the budget where the governor didn't support things, but Republicans are voting for it. But on the housing thing, it was pretty clear that we wouldn't get anywhere.
And just to add to that, we do have a new bill, I believe it's H91, that is about a revisioning of the homelessness program. And I'm just, in all honesty, I'm still learning about that bill, but I agree with the sentiment that we need to do better by our homeless population. And so, as we continue to see how that bill progresses, I mean, my hope is that we can end up transitioning to something that is ultimately more sustainable. And actually, I should probably defer to Senator Cummings on this because you're on the committee.
I am.
And then I'm going to need to go because it is.
Yeah, and I may end up being a no vote on 91 because what it does is it's got money in the budget for transition for this year, and it puts the responsibility for the community action programs. In this area, it's Capstone to run the program. But it looks like after this transition year, their money's going to come from if they can get people off of homelessness. And I'm not sure how you go from one administration costs to 5, because there's 5 caps, if that money's going to come out of services to the homeless. I was on my local CAP board for, I think, 10 years, quite a while. I think they can do the job, but every one of them has said they need to be adequately funded. And I'm afraid that if we spin the responsibility off, then our incentive to put up the kind of fight we put up this year with the governor will go away. And my concern is I want to make sure that we stay under pressure to solve this problem, because it isn't getting better. You
And
know,
I
people.
appreciate that, Anne, because I think you're absolutely right. I was also on the Community Action Board, CVCAC board,
Yep.
before it was Capstone for 7 years.
How many were on the board?
I don't know, but there were, more than a dozen at the time. But the one thing that occurred to me as I was leaving the Barry Opera House in a blustering, gusty snowstorm one day, I don't remember if it was February or the end of January, and a homeless woman came up to me and told me part of her story. And when I got home, I called the Barry police and asked what they were doing. And in the end, they did end up opening another shelter. But that woman was on the street. I could hardly walk from the Opera House to my car a block and a half away, and she had nowhere to go. And it's like, well, the Barry Opera House is empty all night. Why not open up the Barry Opera House and let people come in there out of the shelter? All of the state buildings in Montpelier are empty all night. Why not open them up and get, like, there's just no excuse for people to be on the street. And it's not only about money, it's about political will. And I just want to make sure I say that I'm glad Andy reminded me, because I did see how the Democrats tried to negotiate, and I definitely respect the situation that you all are in. And there are more independent sources of media that you can get to echo the voice that is not beholden to lobbyists and not beholden to corporate underwriters. And I'd be glad to work with you to help get those messages out. So yeah, thank you very much. I don't want to take up any more time. I totally appreciate all you're doing.
Well, I'll finish by saying looks like we're going to be able to have some support for local community radio in the budget. It won't be much, but it's been interesting to have the discussion about the budget item, because it's been a discussion about what our community radio stations, and I know you're supportive of TDR, local community radio station. So hopefully that's one independent news source that we'll see more of in Vermont.
Okay, I will close us out. Oh, Senator Cummings, did you want to say anything?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, just thanks everybody for
Yes.
being here and sticking through. We appreciate it.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you for taking time out.
Yeah,
thank you
so
for helping us.
yeah. I am just gonna drop my email in the chat for anyone who wants to send any follow-up questions, and you will get a notification for Mobilize when the next town hall is scheduled. So thank you all so much and have a great night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.